Dragon Quest is a game I don't hear many people talk about, even though it started an entire genre that gave us many games like Earthbound, Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and much more. It feels like it doesn't get much recognition outside of Japan. So why don't we talk about how the game that created a whole new genre got started? That genre being the Japanese RPG. What does RPG mean? It stands for Rocket Propelled Grenade. Wait, this is the wrong definition. It actually stands for role-playing game, which is where players assume the roles of characters in a fictional setting. Could you tell I was reading this off of a Wikipedia page? Okay, let's just move on to talking about Enix before I get too off track. The company that created this game, Enix, first started off as a tabloid company in 1975. Okay, and then they did real estate. Wait, am I reading this right? There's nothing on here. Oh, and then in 1982, they began publishing video games. I don't think I've ever seen a game company do something like this. I mean, Nintendo makes more sense than Enix because they made products like toys and cars before video games. Entertainment was something Nintendo always did. Enix just jumped from real estate and tabloids to video games in just a few years. Anyways, Enix ended up hosting a contest as they were looking for game proposals, and the winners would get 1 million yen, which is pretty much $10,000 in the US, and could get their game published by Enix. Those winners would end up being Yuji Horii, Koichi Nakamura, and Kuzuro Morita. I hope I'm saying those names right. The first two would end up creating Dragon Quest just a few years later as they wanted to make an RPG for the Famicom. Most RPGs were on PCs at the time and were difficult for people to understand. You basically had to understand games like D&D and have enough computer knowledge to enjoy these types of games. And as someone who has tried playing D&D, I have no idea what I was supposed to be doing, so I don't even want to know how complicated it was trying to play an RPG on the PC back then. But Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura would find a way to streamline the RPG so almost anyone could enjoy it. Development began in 1985 with Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura being the designers for the game. The music was composed by Koichi Sugiyama, who is known for composing soundtracks in movies, television, commercials, etc. And then the one who did all the artwork was Akira Toriyama, which most of you probably know him as the guy who made Dragon Ball, and you can tell it's him just by looking at all the artwork for the Dragon Quest series. The game was released to the public on May 27, 1986 in Japan, and didn't sell well at launch. It wasn't until Shonen Jump, a popular manga magazine company, started advertising it by showing guides on how to play it that the game started getting traction. That's when it began to sell really well. So, how did it sell in the US then? First off, it took 3 years before the game got localized in America. So, it was 1989, and this game looked primitive at that point. Quite a few things had to change, like a battery save system instead of a password save system, more polished graphics, and of course they had to translate the game to English. But not just any English, Old English. Oh yeah, they also had to rename the game to Dragon Warrior here because someone already made a game called Dragon Quest in America. I'm sure this won't be confusing later on. Back to the question from earlier. Did the game do well over here? Yes and no. The only reason why so many copies exist was because they were practically being given away to anyone subscribed to Nintendo Power Magazine back then. So if you're ever wondering why Dragon Quest 2, 3, and 4 cost so much more than 1 in America, that's why. Okay, let's finally start the game up and see what it's all about. What happened to this sticker? Whatever, let's just start the game up. In the land of Alefgard, the princess has been kidnapped and the Ball of Light, a precious artifact that has protected the kingdom, has been stolen by the Dragon Lord. And this knight, which is you, has been tasked to defeat the Dragon Lord by the king because we're supposedly the descendant of Erdrick or something. Although he doesn't seem to care much about the fact that the princess is missing since he didn't even bother to tell me. So that's basically how the story starts. After leaving the castle, we can now start fighting monsters, traveling to different areas of the map, visiting new towns to buy better gear, and maybe get a hint or two from someone to help us progress. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, the grinding. Depending on who you are, you may like grinding in games. I'm personally a bit mixed with this. On one hand, it's kind of nice to shut my brain off every now and then and still make some progress by just simply fighting the same enemy over and over again. And then there's times I just want to explore the world, but I can't because I'm constantly being bombarded with... To be fair, I don't hate it too much in Dragon Quest I, mainly because there's not a lot to do in this game. There's like 3 big dungeons and about 5 towns to go to in the map. So I honestly don't mind it all too much with the constant battling due to how small the world is in here. And because of that, the game also doesn't take incredibly long to beat, which is also not a bad thing. It just means the game is a lot shorter than your average 40 to 50 hour RPG. Okay, so how do we get to the final area? Well, we need to collect a bunch of stuff to eventually claim the Rainbow Drop, which will create a bridge to bring us to the Dragon Lord's castle. Because I guess boats didn't exist at this time, I don't know. One of the key items needed to create the Rainbow Drop is called the Sunstone. And in order to claim it, you have to buy a key, which is not available until like halfway through the game. Then you have to go back to the first castle you started from and unlock the door. Then you have to make your way to the bottom right corner of the castle, and there you'll find the Sunstone. Why did I have the hardest time finding this? The other items weren't too hard to find for me. The next one being the Staff of Rain, which can only be obtained once finding a silver harp inside a grave underneath the town to the west. And finally, we need the Mark of Erdrick, because the only person that can give us the Rainbow Drop does not believe we are the descendants of him. So now we have to figure out where exactly the Mark of Erdrick is at, but if you know where it is, then this should be quick. But if you don't know where it's at, then this may take a second. First, you need to talk to a certain man that'll give you the coordinates to the Mark, but this basically means nothing to us because I have no idea where I am coordinates-wise. So the only thing that can give me said coordinates is from an item called the Princess Pledge, which means we have to save the princess and return her to the king in order to get that item. Now we have to make our way to the exact coordinate where the Mark is at, bring it back to this guy, and then we can get the Rainbow Drop. Now we can finally make our way to the Dragon Lord's castle since we have the bridge to go over, this one tile of water. Are you seriously telling me that this country has no boats whatsoever? For the ending of the game, after going through like 8 floors of this castle, we finally encounter the Dragon Lord, who asks if we want to join him and rule half the world. Which, I don't care about owning half of the world, so no. And now he wants to fight us, which isn't that hard to be honest. He went down in a few hits. Okay, after beating that underwhelming boss, we've now saved the oh my god, he's a dragon now. I mean, it's in his name, but still. This is somewhat challenging, especially if you're still pretty low leveled. But once you figure out a pattern, you're pretty much good to go. Which, for me, it's just hitting him and healing and rinse and repeat. Now that we defeated him, we've reclaimed the Ball of Light and saved the land. Once we've headed back to the castle, the king says you are truly the descendants of Erdrick, and then asks if we want to take the king's place and become the next king of Alefgard. Well, we can't choose to say yes, so we decline by force. The hero then says if he were to become the king, it would be in a land that he discovers. And before we leave, the princess asks if she can join the hero on his journey, and we can't say no. Well, we can, but she'll just keep saying, "But thou must," until we say yes. Well, I guess I have no choice but to bring her along with me. And that's how the story ends, with the hero heading his way out to discover a new land. Wait, hold on. How are you gonna leave the country if you couldn't even access the castle that has like one tile of water between you? Alright, so that was Dragon Quest 1, and yeah, it definitely feels like the first JRPG game. It is fairly basic and to the point when comparing it to other JRPGs that came out not long after this one. Such things like multiple enemies and party members and boats don't exist in this game. But for it being the first, it's not that bad. Like I said, it's a short game and you can beat it in a few hours if you know what you're doing. Overall, I'd recommend this game if you want to try out the series. Just maybe not the NES one if you aren't a fan of excessive grinding. Well, that was pretty decent. I wonder how the second game is going to be like.